Welcome to another video. Tonight we have 8 stories. Tales of secrets, near escapes, Bloody Mary, and more. A huge thank you to all of tonight's writers. If you have a story of your own, it can be sent to reddit.com/r/slumberreads. These videos do take me quite a bit of time to create, so if you're feeling generous, and if you feel this video is worth one, please be sure to drop a like. It helps the channel more than most think. Subscribing if you're new is also greatly appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Every day, at least every one of mine, the sun always sets twice. I can't explain it, and I don't expect you to understand. How could I? No one does. Nor does anyone ever believe me. I've tried to explain it, but I end up either being called weird or the butt of jokes. I can't go to school, but you'll understand why later. The first time it happened was years ago. Before then, nothing seemed out of place. I was at the park with a bunch of friends just enjoying the summer. Propped up on my elbows, I gazed out across the lake languidly and listened to the distant sounds of laughter and splashing. Passive noises always lull me into an almost meditative state, and my thoughts were both everywhere and nowhere at once. The smell of burgers grilling and suntan lotion were a sweet mixture on the breeze. The sky slowly changed as fingers of sunlight curled in its leaving. Purpling clouds were crouched in the soft tangerine of the early evening. Serenity is the only word I've ever found which matches moments such as these. I watched with my friends as the sun set. As the final edge of the glowing saucer slipped below the horizon, everything glitched. A harsh, grinding sound filled the air and my stomach rose as my head cleaved apart in retching pain. The world spun and I began retching hard. Nothing came out, not even bile. It's always just a dry heave. Okay, hey, get help, were snippets of what I heard my friends say before a slashing darkness, like the blip in between cutscenes in a film, happened. At that moment my stomach stopped lurching. The headache, which is the only way I can describe having both halves of your brain ripped down the center, dissipated. I cramped into a ball and clutched my towel. Sweat chilled me as the world slowly stopped spinning. I started picking back up on life around me as my breathing slowed. I smelled the burgers and suntan lotion. I heard the playing and splashing, but none of my friends were there, and the people, they weren't the ones I remembered seeing. I watched the sun set for the second time that day, fearing. As it dipped below the skyline, I felt within me for any sign that the same thing would happen. Sometimes when we think we're sick, we try to enhance those feelings in order to protect them better, or to stand on solid ground knowing that we aren't. As a parting shot, a direct beam of light hit me square in the face, then disappeared. Night began unfurling its speckled cloak, and I had to be back by 10, so I grabbed my towel and headed home. When I got there, my parents were hysterical. Gripping me by the shoulders and shaking me, my mother spat out, "Where the fuck were you?" "I'm sorry," I said with a sideways glance at the clock which read 10:20. "I must have lost track." "Of what? Of time?" my father yelled. I stared at them dumbfounded. They've never been this pissed over 20 minutes before, I thought. Stammering, I said, I'm only 20 minutes late." I looked from face to face in the ensuing silence. My mother, father, and even my sister sitting on the couch seemed frozen in time. Everything except the grandfather clock in the corner, that is, which ticked a steady beat. There are moments when you know that everyone is sharing the exact same thought, and we were all dreadfully aware of each passing second. "It's been 24 hours, my mother said, punctuating each word painfully. "24 hours echoed through my mind. My head swam at this as I started picking up on small things. 24 hours. Everyone was wearing different clothes. 24 hours. My sister's school books were different. 24 hours. She dyed her hair. I grappled with what my mother said and saw how sallow they all looked, like they'd been up all night worrying. "I'm sorry." I blurted confused and began sobbing. How could this be? How could I have lost that much time? This isn't possible. I babbled and bawled simultaneously, telling them what had happened. I was beset, remorseful, and utterly confused. The atmosphere changed and they tried calming me down. I can't say for sure how the rest of the night went. My memory of it is scattered. A few things, however, I can say. My father was on the phone with the police and my friend's parents, letting them know that I had returned. My mother cradled me while my sister texted. Finally, I threw myself under my blankets and slept. I dreamt wildly, vividly, and restlessly. These were untouchable dreams, the ones your conscious mind protects you from when you're awake. I slogged out of bed exhausted and floated through a day softened and undefined by a strong disbelief in reality. Through the muffle, I heard my friends whisper with others, and I felt alone and alien. After school, I went home, did my homework, and set the table just as always. My dad fired up the grill and we ate. Everything was fine until the sun set. As the final, direct sunlight hid, that awful, grinding sound reverberated through my skull. My stomach became a pretzel and I dropped to the ground, heaving again and again. My arms wrapped around me, and I heard a robotic voice ask through the static, "What's wrong?" Cutscene. Gagging, sweating, and crushed into myself, I felt a reduction, a sense of relief, my brain shrinking to normal and the warm touch of the sun leave my face. I shiver and cry out, and my family rushed from the house and scooped me up in a tight embrace. Our shared confusion and terror poured from us all as we wept together. This was the beginning of our nightmare. I'll spare you details of the years that followed. Suffice it to say, I saw doctors and became institutionalized. No one could help. No one can, it seems. 6 sunsets ago, my parents realized that the scientists studying me saw me more as a guinea pig to learn from, rather than a patient to treat. So petitioned my release and I went home. I'm sitting here now with my tongue mashed, swollen, and unusable. When I got home, something changed. This is why I'm writing now. 5 sunsets ago, while lying in my bed waiting for the end of the day, the glitch hit me harder. This time, my heart pounded and I sensed danger like never before. I was forced bolt upright and I tried to catch my breath and balance at the same time. My vision split. The room pulsed electrically to the rhythm of my heart and then triplicated, separating. I saw 3 versions of it side by side and each was a different, translucent color and then nothing. I blacked out. I have no idea if time passed or how much, but I was woken in the divide by an unvoiced question. In the rushing pitch dark to my right was a neon green, yet transparent orb of energy. The question posed, "Will you join me or go back into the darkness?" was answered instantly, and I found myself both inside and outside of it. The surge of delirious power was remarkable. It moved at breakneck speeds, and I was overwhelmed. From inside I spoke, but heard my voice projected outside in a deeper, throaty tone saying, "Holy shit. Holy fucking shit." Every move it made was absolute perfection. I'd never felt anything like it before. Imagery came to mind as we shifted and traveled. At times, it was like a roller coaster, dipping, swerving, and ascending. At other times, I was flying downhill on a mountain bike through narrow stands of trees. All the while, it was reaching out, making connections and pulling things inside. I still can't understand exactly what was happening, but I felt like rebuilding. There was an urgency to it all. Some underlying fear. It needed to make every move exactly. Nothing could be out of place, and it had something to do with what was lurking in the darkness just to our left. I was aware that out in the black was another entity, and we were racing it. It was never defined, and I was too caught up in the shock of feeling perfection for the first time in my life to ask, but we needed to reach a certain point before it did. I knew we would, and the closer we got, the more my ecstasy grew. Yes, yes, shouting. Just before we reached that spot, blackout. I woke to my mother wiping a bloody froth off my face. She told me I had reappeared in a seizure. I swallowed iron. My tongue was a smashed potato that filled my mouth. Closing my eyes, I slept until morning. Every setting sun since. I've taken that ride, and each time that perfection has become incrementally less so. Every second sunset since, I've woken up seizing. I'm terrified of every evening, every race, and what it means to lose. And every time I open my eyes again, I'm writing this because I can no longer speak. And this evening might just be my last chance to share. I was raised in a Christian home and went to church every Sunday. I've been going to the same church all my life until I eventually graduated and went to college in 2014. My dad wasn't always able to come to church with my mother and I, because sometimes he had to work on Sundays in a genetics lab. The church was small, and I never mingled with the other kids in my youth group. I didn't go to the same school as them, and they were often in their own cliques. I was mostly quiet around them, but I usually had conversations with my youth pastor. However, I did have two close friends at the youth group, May and Max. They were siblings. May is 2 years older than Max, and he is 1 year younger than me. May was tall, had long brown hair, blue eyes, and her facial features made it look like she had a smirk on her face at all times. She had a friendly personality and always asked questions to people she talked to. May took karate for 8 years and got a black belt, but she had to quit after getting badly injured in a sparring match. Max had a pair of green glasses, brown eyes, and short black hair. He was shy, but as I reached out to him and his sister, we became good friends. He was into Marvel and DC comics, and whenever I asked him about a character in the comics, he would ramble everything about the character as if he was an encyclopedia. Their father worked the same genetics lab as my father, and their mother died in a tragic car accident. Although May was very friendly to everyone around her, something always felt off about her. When she talks and asks things like, "How was your week at school?" her voice always sounded like she was reading a script. She hardly displayed any emotions whenever she was having a conversation. This made her seem robotic, but whenever I asked people in the youth group about it, they told me that they didn't notice anything wrong with her. Max wasn't like this in the slightest. When he gets interested in a conversation, he is full of energy and gets bubbly. Whenever I ask May for a social media account or phone number to contact her, she always gives the same response in a gentle tone with no hesitation. "I'll give it to you later." If I tell her that she said that last time, she just repeats what she said in the same tone. It felt a lot like a pre-recording, and when I tried to ask her friends if they had her number or something, they said that she never gave it to them. Luckily, Max gave his number to me, and whenever I wanted to hang out with him, I always made sure to include May unless she's unavailable. Another thing I found odd was that as soon as the youth group session and the service was over, their family would leave church almost instantly without talking to anyone. I just assumed that they were busy, but it always felt suspicious. Over the years, I got to know more about May. She apparently has been going through a major existential crisis for a long time. I was asked if she was suicidal, and she replied softly, "If I die in this world, I can easily be replaced, and nobody will know what happened to me." I had no idea what that meant, and when I tried to ask her what she was talking about, she gave the same response repeatedly in the same tone. This made me worried about her, but she told me that she knew things would get better later in life. One Saturday morning, Max invited me to his house to hang out for the afternoon and have supper with his family. When I came to their house, I noticed that May wasn't around, and Max told me that she was at a track meet. We spent about an hour playing on his PS3, and then Max wanted to do something else. He had me wait upstairs in his bedroom while he went to get things in the basement. His room was large, and he had 2 shelves on the wall. The top shelf displayed Marvel merchandise, and the bottom shelf displayed DC merchandise. I waited in his room for about 30 seconds, and then I started to get bored. I walked out of his room and headed to the basement. "Max, what are you trying to find in the basement?" I said. "It's a surprise. Give me a few more minutes and get back in my room," Max replied. As I walked up to his room, I decided to sneak into May's bedroom out of curiosity. Compared to Max's bedroom, her room was small and basic. At first, I didn't find anything strange. Then I noticed there was a diary on her desk, and I decided to look inside. Here are some of the things that she wrote. Tuesday, March 5th, 2010. "I don't understand what my purpose is in life. I get decent grades in school and took karate for a while, but they don't mean anything to me. I only study so hard so I don't drop out, and I initially took karate as an exercise, but everyone kept pressuring me because I was talented. My father doesn't even let me have a phone or a social media account. I'm not even allowed to tell my friends about this. But Max can have them, so why can't I? If I die in this world, who would know anything about me? I am lost with the life I have. Why did God put me on this earth?" Friday, March 16th, 2010. My mother has always been a secret for some strange reason. My father would often tell me and Max about her at the dinner table, but neither of us have ever seen a picture of her. When I asked what she looked like when I was little, my father said that I strongly resemble her. I don't understand why our mother has been kept a secret. When my father talks about her, it only raises more questions than answers. I guess I will never know who my mother was. Wednesday, March 24th, 2010. I've started going to therapy lately. My father claims that it will be helpful, but I would prefer to be left alone. Today, while my father drove me home after an appointment, he revealed something about my mother. He told me that this was the reason why I can't have a phone or social media account. I am in too much shock to write down what he said to me. If I tell anyone what he said, no one will believe me. Flowers. So many of the same and so many unneeded. Of all the diary entries, this one confused and unsettled me the most. What could her father have said to put her in so much shock? Suddenly I heard Max calling from downstairs. "Okay, you can come downstairs now. Sorry for keeping you waiting," he said. I closed the diary and came downstairs. Max was holding a big box. "This is where May and I store all of our Nerf guns and accessories," said Max. I looked inside and was amazed at how many Nerf guns they have collected. We spent the next 2 hours shooting each other and experimenting with all the guns and accessories. Later, May came home from the track meet and joined us in our Nerf battles outside. After the Nerf battles, May went upstairs to take a shower. In the meantime, Max and I sat at the dinner table. Their father cooked us burgers and a potato salad for supper. When we finished preparing for our meal, May came downstairs to join us. After a short prayer, we ate. The burgers were decent, but the potato salad was very dry. May told us about what happened in the track meet. One of her friends did a prank involving fake worms in a can to the coach of a different track team, and everyone laughed at the coach. After dinner, I thanked everyone for inviting me and having a good time. Several weeks later, it was Bring Your Child to Work Day. My dad took me to the genetics lab that he works in. I was surprised not to see May, but Max was with his father. "Where's May?" I asked. "She's terribly sick and had to go to the hospital. The doctors told me she will be okay by tomorrow," said Max. Our fathers then showed us 3 elephant beetles displayed in a large enclosure. "Magnificent, aren't they?" said my dad. "Normally they live up to 3 months, but we modified these beetles to live up to 3 years. Max had an amazing look on his face. "Why would you want to extend their lifespan?" said Max. His father smiled at him. So that people can enjoy them as pets, he said. After the presentation, they started to work with various lab equipment. Max and I started to get bored, so we decided to sneak out of the room and explore the facility. We then walked into a room with a big blast door. Max noticed a nearby switch and opened it. What we discovered completely caught us off guard. Behind the blast door was a massive tank filled with a mysterious green liquid. There were dozens of bodies that resembled May floating lifelessly in the tank with their eyes wide open. Max ran out of the room in terror. I ran with him, but I dumped into a desk and I heard something fall. It was a photo frame, with the photo facing the floor. I picked it up, and it was a wedding photo of May and Max's father. The woman who he was with looked exactly like May. I looked at the photo, and then looked back at the tank. May was never Max's sister, but rather a clone of her father's wife. Flowers, so many of the same, and so many unneeded. I live alone in a small, one-bedroom apartment in a small, single-story building. It's only a few miles away from the fast food restaurant where I work. I get to ride my bicycle to and from work, which saves me a ton on gas. The apartment itself is perfect for me. The rent is low and I don't need things to be fancy. The landlord loves me because I handle my own repairs, or just deal with it and don't complain. Which must be refreshing for him considering how often stuff doesn't quite work right. A perfect example of this is the heat. For whatever reason, it gives out at least once a week. Rather than make a fuss and complain about that every week, I've learned to adapt. The heater itself is inside of a small cabinet in the hallway appropriately located next to the fuse box. If I get home, and it's usually chilly inside, I just have to flip the fuse back to on, play with the buttons a bit, relight the pilot lights, and I'm back in business. This happens so often that I've started just keeping one of those long, flexible barbecue lighters right inside of the little cabinet. So, anyway, last week I got the Rona. Being about 50 years too young to be in any danger, all I experienced was a few days of mild fatigue and a loss of smell and taste. The fatigue made the long shifts and bike rides pretty exhausting, but the health benefits of not being able to taste probably more than made up for that. It's amazing how many more vegetables you eat when everything tastes like the same nothing. Why should I snag a chicken nugget or a frozen cookie when it tastes no different than a handful of lettuce? On Thursday, I worked a long shift. Between the bike ride in, the 12 hours on my feet, and then the bike ride home, I was absolutely pooped and very sore. You could have probably confused me for a Frankenstein the way I was walking when I got to my door. Within a few seconds of walking in the door, I had this notable sense of mild dread. My stomach felt like I was sitting in my room waiting for my mom to get home to slap me silly for getting suspended from school. I had nothing to be nervous about, but I sure was. I chalked the anxious tummy up to my exhaustion and made a beeline to the shower. I needed to wash off the quarter-inch of grease that coated my entire body, sure, but what I really wanted was that soothing hot water to help with my aching muscles. I turned on the water and waited for it to get hot, and waited and waited. The water stayed ice cold and I sighed as I checked the bathroom closet to see that the water heater's pilot light had gone out. Great. There's no way I was going to be staying awake long enough to wait for 20 gallons to get up to a bearable temperature. Hey, at least all of the grease would make my bed sheets feel as smooth as satin for the night. It was about that time that the internal heat from the bike ride had worn off, and I realized that the apartment itself was a bit nippy as well. I sighed once again and made my way to the hallway cabinet. Sure enough, the heater was off and the flame was out. The fuse in the nearby box hadn't been tripped and the heater's display lit up when I pushed the buttons. So at least half of my job was done, but the lighter was missing. I checked the floor in case it had fallen. I checked the nearby closet in case it had rolled or something. I checked the bathroom in case I had forgotten and used it for a candle. Nothing. I went to the kitchen junk drawer to grab a spare. Nothing. I went to the back window ledge to grab the medicinal one. Nothing. I did notice that I had left the window open, though, which certainly didn't help with the cold. I closed it. Throughout this entire back and forth journey through the apartment, I must have patted my pant pockets 1,000 times expecting one to be in there, but no such luck. Finally, I decided that if the world was going to hide all of my lighters from me, that I'd go and make my own. Channeling my inner household hacker, I withdrew a long spaghetti noodle from the box and went over to the stove to light it. The frickin' knob had fallen off and I couldn't find it anywhere. Not cool. I dropped the noodle to the floor and huffed and puffed my way to the bedroom. This was all going to be tomorrow me's problem. By this point, my legs and back were as stiff as a board. My stomach was really churning, and I just wanted to sleep. It's not like it was freezing outside. I'd just use an extra comforter on the bed and I'll be fine. It was a little difficult to fall asleep between the nervousness and the body discomfort, but at least I was warm, snug, and slimy. I was a toasty little slug. That night, I had the craziest, most vivid, and strangely unsettling dream of my life. It started with me lying on my back and looking up at the evening sky. My whole body burned like I was one big paper cut slathered in sanitizer. Even though I knew that this had to be a dream, I had absolutely no control over myself. It was like I was watching a cutscene in a first-person shooter video game. I stood up from the grass to see the front of my apartment. I approached the door and tried to open it, but it was locked. I walked to the back of the building, opened the window, and crawled inside. Again, all on autopilot. Once inside, I walked up to the hallway cabinet, opened it up, and grabbed a lighter. I went to the kitchen junk drawer and grabbed the 3 or 4 lighters in there. I twisted the knob off of the stove, too. It was like I was retracing my steps from after I got home, but actually finding what I was looking for instead of not finding it. Every movement hurt. Every time I touched something, it stung. As I walked by the bathroom door, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and froze. Not by choice, because again, I was just an observer in this freaky dream. But I would have frozen by choice if I had control over myself. The person looking at me from the mirror was only barely me. It had my frame, and it was wearing the tattered remains of my work shirt, but it was missing certain defining characteristics that really make me, me. Things like skin and hair. It looked like some lonely chef had made a companion, and the only 2 ingredients handy were meatloaf and hash browns. It looked like a scarecrow made of inside-out ravioli rolled around in some Rice Krispies. Whoever the main character of this dream was, stared at itself for a while, reaching up and touching its face like it was just as surprised and grossed out as I was. The eyes looked sad. It turned and looked back towards the open window in the bedroom, and then I couldn't breathe and I started to panic and I woke up and rolled over and threw up everywhere. I was back in my room under my 2 blankets. Sort of, I think. I was very disoriented. I was soaking wet from sweat and vomit. The room was spinning. I tried to get up, but I was too weak and I collapsed on the ground next to the bed, tangled in the bedding. I threw up again. I could barely think from the heaving, both dry and wet, with effort far greater than should have been necessary. I crawled out of the bedroom, into the hallway, and through the living room. I left behind me a snail trail of the previous day's lunch and half-digested lettuce, smeared by the twisted sheets that followed behind me. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew that I had to get out. I felt like I was breathing through a damp sock. The air was cold, but it was heavy and stifling. The front door handle was a million miles into the air, but I still managed to reach it and pull open the door. The frosty morning air hit me like a baseball bat, and I was gone. I woke up 2 days later in a hospital bed. My neighbor had found me when she left for work that morning. I guess something about a naked man wrapped in bed sheets and soaked in throw-up lying unconscious half outside of a front door caught her attention. It was either that or the overpowering smell of gas coming from the apartment. That's right. My inability to smell had nearly gotten me killed. Apparently a temporary gas outage in the area combined with the heater going out had lined up just right so that the automatic shutoff hadn't been tripped like it normally is. All in all, if it had to happen, it couldn't have happened more fortuitously. That back window hadn't been open for most of the day. I wouldn't have lasted as long as I did. If I had been sleeping on my side, I wouldn't have been woken up from choking on my vomit and I'd have died in my sleep. If I hadn't lost every single gosh darn lighter in the house along with the stove knob, oh boy, me and everyone else would have been blown sky high. I did eventually find all those lighters and the knob, by the way. They were all in a pile outside on the grass behind the back window. My wife Alicia and I decided to move to a new neighborhood for a change of pace. And I guess we got what we wanted. My first impression of the new place was quiet. Our old house was much closer to the city, and there were always noise. Traffic, people talking, music, dogs barking. I never realized how much it had bugged me until we left. The house the realtor showed us was huge, easily twice the size of our last one. 2 stories, a double garage, and a recently renovated kitchen. To be honest though, the yard was the part that sold me. It was enormous. Fenced on both sides for privacy while the back was open to a forest we were told went on for miles. Alicia and I always dreamed of starting a family, and this seemed like the perfect place. I could already picture myself building a treehouse and maybe a swing set for our future kids to play on. We hardly even needed to discuss it. We both knew this house was meant for us. By the next week, we were unpacking boxes into our new home. Felt like a dream come true. One by one, our new neighbors came by to welcome us and drop off food or gifts. They were all so much friendlier than the standoffish loners and drunk college kids that we'd lived near before. And we were ecstatic. Everything seemed so perfect, and then it started to get weird. The last visitor came by while we were in the middle of eating one of the delicious casseroles that had been so kindly dropped off earlier. She was a short, round woman who introduced herself as Marjorie, with a strong southern accent. But y'all can call me Marge. Our conversation started off nice enough. She asked about us and how we were settling in. She sort of reminded me of my own mother, who lived across the country. We were all laughing at one of the many jokes she'd cracked when she leaned in close with an out-of-place, conspiratorial look on her face. Y'all aren't planning on getting any pets, were ya? I shook my head. Good. You'd better not. Alicia gave a nervous smile, unsettled just as I was by the sudden change in tone. Why not? Marge looked around as though checking for eavesdroppers, which I found ridiculous. You haven't noticed how quiet it is? She had dropped her voice low, and there was a quiet urgency to it that made me nervous. I shrugged in response, and Marge suddenly locked eyes with me. There was a mad light in her eyes that made me feel like maybe Marge wasn't all there. Listen, bad things happen around here to pets. Any animals, really. I tried for a chuckle to diffuse the sudden tension, but it fell flat. Marge's gaze sharpened. It isn't funny, boy. You seen any squirrels here? Birds? I hadn't. It wasn't unusual. I didn't really pay much attention to the wildlife, but even as I listened, the woods outside were silent. No birds sang in the trees, and I couldn't even hear any crickets chirping, which was definitely not normal on a summer night this warm. He doesn't like the animals, Marge said absently. What? Alicia said, shaking her head. What the hell are you talking about, Marge? I could see Alicia's discomfort in the curl of her shoulders and the shakiness of her voice. Suddenly I'd had enough of this strange woman coming into my house and scaring us with her paranoia. Thanks for coming by, Marjorie, but I think we'd better get back to our dinner. I made to usher her out the door, but she threw up her hands. Wait. She looked frantically between us. Please, let me speak. Just 2 minutes. I frowned, but didn't move to stop her as she continued talking. Haven't you seen the crime rate around here? I shook my head, but Alicia nodded. It's almost 0, isn't it? Marge nodded. This is one of the safest neighborhoods in the country. We're safe here because he protects us. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Whether it was caused by the topic of discussion or the dropping temperatures outside, I couldn't say. Who, Marge? Alicia asked, her voice almost a whisper. He isn't. He doesn't have a name, no. Marge's words were quick, and she stumbled as she spoke. We call him the Guardian, if we call him anything at all. Every rational bone in my body screamed at me to throw this mad woman out of my home, but the conviction burning in her eyes was strong enough that I felt I had to hear her out. He doesn't like to be noticed. He stays in the woods mostly, but we, the neighborhood, we have to deal with him. We provide for him, and he protects us. I had a question and I wasn't sure I wanted an answer. Provide what? I asked with trepidation. Bones. Marge replied, whispering with a feverish intensity. Any kind. Scraps from dinner usually, but the hunters will give him almost everything from their kills. And if you don't give, he takes. That explains why there aren't any animals, I thought wryly. Marge was staring at us. Alicia looked like she was trying to process all of the craziness, but I was just tired. All right, Marge, I said, perhaps not as kindly as I could have. Maybe I'll give this guardian my next wishbone. Marge growled. Honest to God, the old woman growled at me. I don't want you to regret moving here, she snapped. I won't, I assured her. She glared at me, then stomped out of the house and slammed the door behind her like a spoiled kid. There were several long moments of silence, then I exhaled loudly. Well, that was sure something, I said. Alicia snorted. Yeah, she's crazy. I hummed in agreement and we went back to our dinner, which was unpleasantly cold by now. We ate in silence, both thoroughly creeped out by our new neighbor. Not creeped out enough, though, to keep us up. By the time we finished eating, it was almost 11, and a long day of unpacking left us exhausted. We practically collapsed into bed and fell asleep immediately. I dreamed that night, but forgot what about as soon as I woke up. There was just a lingering sense of unease, the kind that made me want to check under my bed for monsters like I was a child again. Chalked it up to a new house and ghost stories on the brain. Didn't mean anything. The next day went the same as the one before. We didn't have much to unpack, so it was quick work. But I enjoyed daydreaming about what we could do with the house as I set up furniture. This one could be the nursery, I said, pointing out a small bedroom next to ours. Alicia grinned at me. I was overjoyed by the new house and the possibilities that came with it, but throughout the day, I couldn't shake a vague sense of fear. I felt like something was watching me, which was ridiculous. There was hardly anyone around. I kept sparing furtive glances over my shoulder anyway, making sure that nothing lurked in the dark doorways. I fell into a kind of trance as I worked, and it was broken only by the grumble of my stomach. As I came back to the real world, I noticed the sun was starting to set, streaking the sky red and orange. I had been working for longer than I had planned, and it was a good few hours past dinner time now. I found Alicia downstairs cleaning the bathroom. She'd done the same thing as me, and was surprised by how late it was. We both quickly agreed not to bother cooking. We were exhausted and starving, now that we paid attention. I volunteered to pick up some fried chicken. It wasn't a hearty home-cooked meal, but it was food, and that's all I really wanted. We ate like starved beasts around the kitchen table, shoveling down handfuls of fries and gnawing on chicken wings right down to the bones. The bones. Alicia and I seemed to have that thought at the same time, because we both looked at the small, neat pile of bare chicken bones, destined for the compost bin. Should we? Alicia started. I'm a rational man. I don't believe in ghost stories, but there was some inexplicable urge that told me I needed to listen to Marge. Maybe it would make Alicia, hell, and me feel better. Nothing else, at least it would fertilize the grass a little. I nodded at her, and we finished our dinner with little conversation. Once the table was cleared, I gathered the fragile bones in my hands and headed to the back door. Alicia followed at my heels. We didn't say a word as we left the house and walked through the backyard towards the tree line. The sun was almost completely down, bathing everything in an inky blue light. The quiet of the woods and the thick heat in the air felt oppressive, like it trapped any words I might have said inside my mouth. Got the feeling that this was a ritual meant to be completed in silence. As we reached the basis of the first towering pines, the unofficial marker of where our property ended and the wilderness began, I knelt almost reverently and placed the bones in a small pile on the ground, sheltered in a hollow between two tree roots. They glowed a milky off-white in the fading dusk. Then we turned and walked back to the safety and light of our home. We didn't look back, not when we felt the presence of something watching us. Unseen, gaze boring into our backs, and certainly not at the soft crackle of branches and leaf litter. Whatever was out there, I had no desire to lay eyes on it. We kept our eyes forwards until we were safely inside with the door locked behind us. Once inside, I sagged against the wall and let out a harsh breath. Adrenaline was pulsing through my veins and my heart pounded. For no reason at all, I felt a deep terror. I was a grown man reduced almost to hysterics by a spooky story and some broken branches. From the looks of it, Alicia felt the same way. What the hell was that? Alicia panted. I just shook my head. I didn't know and I didn't want to find out. I slept better that night, strangely. And the next day, the weird paranoia I'd been feeling had disappeared. I didn't want to believe that it was related to Marge's story, but I couldn't help seeing the connection. An uneasy feeling when we didn't provide any bones, which vanished as soon as we did. Alicia and I settled into a routine after a little while. We left bones out a couple times a week, and while they were always gone by morning, we never saw or heard anything unusual. Honestly, there was no proof at all that anything lurked out in those woods, other than the feeling of being watched that I got whenever I went near the forest. It was entirely possible that we were just paranoid idiots being pranked by our neighbors. Well, until last night. The day had been perfectly normal. Alicia and I had both started our new jobs by this point, and after work we made ourselves some damn good ribs on the barbecue. Once we finished eating, we dropped the bones off at the tree line, a process that was a lot less terrifying now than it used to be. We fell asleep a few hours later. I woke up to a horrible noise. To my tired brain it sounded like the world was ending. Then it came again. A few seconds later, and I was able to place it as an animal screeching. I sighed and got up to close the window, knowing that I probably wouldn't get much more sleep. Then something much, much larger than a typical woodland creature slammed into the side of the house, rattling the windows, and my heart stopped in my chest. "David?" Alicia asked sleepily from behind me. "What the hell was that?" I didn't answer. Just crept towards the open window. Something screamed again, high and loud and terrifyingly close. I wasn't sure I wanted to see what was out there. I heard another scream. This one unmistakably human and in pain. "Calling 911. Alicia whispered into the gloom. I grabbed the edge of the windowsill and slowly, carefully moved so I could see out the window. I immediately wished I hadn't. The first thing I noticed was a man's face, not even 2 feet from my own, which is unnerving to see from the second story. He was dangling from a piece of vinyl siding, his face contorted in pain, or what I could see of it, at least. He was wearing a ski mask that obscured most of his features. It occurred to me in a disconnected way that he was probably trying to break into our house. I was immediately distracted from that startling realization by what I noticed next. My brain processed it in pieces. Snapshots. Long, thin claws sunk deep into flesh. An inhuman skull with a mouth of misshapen teeth bared in a grin. A too large figure with limbs bent in places there should be no joints. I bit back a scream. This beast was enormous, tall enough to reach my window if it stood, but right now it seemed preoccupied with ripping the would-be criminal from the side of my house. Its claws were each easily the length of my forearm, wickedly sharp and slick with blood. As I watched the creature slash downwards, claws tearing through the man's skin like paper, and he howled in agony. I was frozen. Neither side deserved my help, but I couldn't just stand there. I heard sirens in the distance, and I prayed that they would arrive soon. The creature had clearly heard them too. It tilted its head to the side in an eerily human gesture, then reared up on two legs. For a long moment I was looking at it face to face. A deer skull with empty, rotted eye sockets and teeth too sharp to be a deer's. An enormous rack of antlers jutted out from its head. Despite the fact that this thing was made of dead and decomposing parts, I could tell that there was something alive in there. It was looking at me. Then the scene was lit up with red and blue flashing lights as the police arrived. The creature dropped down, grabbing the burglar in a crushing grip against its gaping rib cage. It spared me a final glance, then shambled off to the forest on three legs. I heard the man's whimpers fade into silence. I didn't move a muscle until the police came looking for me. They took a statement and investigated the side of my house, which looked like it had been hit by a truck. I floated through the whole ordeal. I knew they wouldn't find any evidence of foul play, and I was right. At the end of the day, they declared that I had witnessed an attack by a wild animal. They also heavily suggested that I was hallucinating. I knew what I saw, though. There was something living in those woods. Some creature made of bones and dead things. Or better or worse, we were under its protection. Let me start off by saying that this story was based about 8 years ago, and to this day no one believes me, but it lives in the back of my mind. To understand this story, I have to explain the layout of this house. It was a small house with 3 bedrooms and a massive den, which we believed used to be the garage. All of the bedrooms and bathrooms were placed on the left side of the house, while everything else was on the right. To get to the bedrooms you had to go through a door and a long but thin hallway. My room was the smallest of the 3, but it faced the backyard, so it stayed dark up until 8 in the morning. Don't get me wrong, it was great not having to worry about the sun in my face, but the backyard was terrifying at night. It was massive, easily the size of a football field, and was almost completely surrounded by tall oak trees. The only light in the backyard was this singular street lamp, which was clearly outdated. My mom thought that since my room didn't get much sun, we could just put up a more decorative curtain. And by decorative, I mean it was just some see-through tulle curtains that were always pinned up, and a bunch of tiny ribbons with gems glued to them dangling from the curtain rod. It was extremely girly, and at the time I thought it was adorable. The window itself was huge, and just outside it was the air conditioner for the whole house. Now, I think for safety reasons they had positioned the fence around it where you could still access my window from outside. You could even see a small path that led up to my window where people clearly walked it a lot. That in itself should have tipped off my parents that something was wrong, but I digress. Another thing you should know about my window is that it was missing a screen on one side of it, the side where the path was. I never really was too afraid of the window, because there were stray cats that lived in the woods around the house. I would put food outside for them, and they eventually would end up bringing their babies to me. We could never keep them, however. My mother was allergic. Eventually, they figured out which room was mine, and would visit me at night. It was great, but I think I let myself get too comfortable with this routine. Since I was still a child, I was still very much afraid of the dark, meaning I had a lamp on for most of the night. Until I was so ready to pass out, I wasn't afraid anymore. But when you have the lamp on, you can't really see much outside. I got less afraid of the dark when there was a cat outside my window. I would often turn my lamp off so I could see them better when they came over. I don't know how I could tell that there was a cat outside, but I could just tell. One night, I had been up late watching YouTube on my laptop. I think something had happened that scared me and I just couldn't fall asleep that night. So I guess I was already paranoid that night. It was about 3 in the morning when I could feel something outside my window. Thinking it was a kitty, I quickly shut my laptop and reached out to turn off my lamp. What I saw turned my skin to ice. It was a humanoid creature, no taller than an average teenage boy. It was pale to the point where it was practically white. It was wearing a white hoodie and had its hands stuffed in the pockets. It had long black hair that covered its face, but even though you couldn't see its face, you could tell that it didn't really have one to cover. Its face was missing. I was absolutely frozen in fear. My eyes were locked onto this creature. I could tell it knew I was watching it back, but it just stood there, not moving an inch, not even breathing. I must have been staring at this thing for 10 minutes, not moving an inch. After another 5 minutes of horrible silence, something in my brain finally spoke up and told me to run for it. I tried to look towards my door without letting the creature know I was ready to run, but something in my head screamed louder to run. I realized that the moment I tried to escape, that thing is going to try to get into my room. Something I failed to mention earlier was that my window was always unlocked. My parents would often lose their keys and would need to crawl through a window to get in. That window was mine. I bolted from my door, throwing my laptop to the ground in the process. The quickest thing I could think of was to wake up my brother. I remember just banging on his door. I was banging so hard my hands hurt. When my brother opened the door, I just remember sobbing. I ran past him and hid behind his bed and just cried. I was so terrified I couldn't even properly explain what happened. Somehow, through my tears, I had explained to my brother what I had just seen. My brother grabbed one of his metal baseball bats and turned to go back into my room. I didn't want to be left alone at this point, so I followed him. When I turned the corner, I could see that the thing was gone. It was just gone. My brother did a full check in my room, and there was nothing. No sign of what I saw anywhere. At this point, my brother was beginning to brush it off as a nightmare and told me to go back to sleep. I know what I saw. I know it was real. I wasn't asleep. My brother left me in the room staring at my window, and I can just remember questioning, how long has that thing been watching me? Let's just say I didn't sleep in my own room that night, and I refused to keep my window open from that day forward. I stopped turning off my lamp at night as well. I figured that it was best if I couldn't see it. It's been 12 years since that day. 6 since I last stayed sober for more than 2 days straight. My entire existence has been based around forgetting the events of that day to the point I couldn't decide if the events were real anymore. But today I saw her parents. I know it was real. All of it. Fuck me. I wish I could lie to you, like I've been lying to myself for all these years. I wish I could say that demons and ghosts and heaven and hell were all concepts made up by man to control the gullible. I wish I could say that there was no paranormal and there was a scientific explanation to everything. That death is the end for us. That it was the eater of all worlds. But that day I saw beyond the veil. But all this is just bullshit. I think the real reason I am writing this is because I miss her. I miss the girl I had a hand in killing. The courts have just let me free. They wouldn't let me join her. And as fate would have it, I wouldn't be allowed to die as well. I think looking back it all makes sense. The rope breaking the first time. My roommate walking in before I bled out the second. I know now it has to be this way. This is my purgatory and I know now the only way to cross the river Styx. Before I join her, on her birthday I want to share my story. The events of that day to whoever has read this far. When I was 8 years old, me and my girlfriend, Sophie, used to hang out all the time. At the time, when my entire social group was just guys, she was a breath of fresh air. We were neighbors and were born just 2 days apart. Being 2 days older than me, she took on the role of the elderly sister. We basically spent our entire childhood together, inseparable at school and at home. We were best friends for life, but then Sophie told me she was moving away. At the time, I didn't even know what it meant, just that we would grow apart. And it sucked. On her last day at our school, before the summer break, she announces to the whole class that we were going to play the Bloody Mary game. I, for one, didn't even know what it was, but Sophie was a horror movie fanatic. She pulled me closer and whispered into my ear, "After the break ends and you come to school, if anyone asks about me, just tell them Bloody Mary took her." I agreed. I thought that was the whole prank. When I went to her house to hang out for the last time, most of the family stuff was gone. Her dad was away at work and our moms were talking with each other in our apartment. She comes out of the bathroom, goes into her room, brings out a printed page and hands it to me. In it were rules of the Bloody Mary game. The rules were: 1. Turn off all the lights in the bathroom. 2. Lock the door. 3. Light 1 candle. 4. Spin around 3 times while saying Bloody Mary each time. At the end of the page it was written, "She will appear behind you." I was spooked. I think she saw that. Sophie started laughing. She said something along the lines of, "Oh, come on. You know this is just one of those pranks people play on their friends." I wish it was. To prove that it was fake, Sophie ushered me into the bathroom, turned off the lights, and lit the candle. I obliged to her wish and closed my eyes while spinning and saying Bloody Mary. I would open my eyes when she would say, "See, she isn't there, just like I told you." On the third turn, I waited for what felt like an eternity to hear her saying, "She isn't there, open your eyes." But she didn't. She grabbed my hand. She was shivering and I had to open my eyes. In that moment, what I saw, I don't think any therapy or any amount of time can make that scar fade away. In the mirror she was, or rather, whatever it was, its forehead covered by a red veil, face hollower than physics should allow, eyes sunken and bloodshot, a mouth twisted open wide, teeth jagged, smile demonic. She quietly whispers, "Who asks for me?" I had pissed my pants. That voice wasn't something a human could ever have. Sinister, deep, and malicious. I realized that she wasn't standing behind us in just the mirror. She was actually behind us as well. I saw the figure lean over me, with her long, rotting fingers. She bends over me and asks me if it was the girl who wanted to summon her. I will never forgive myself for what I did after that. I said, it was her. She wanted to prove the game was fake and drag me into it. Just then I thought the smile couldn't get wider. It did. All these years later, I know what that look Sophie gave me then meant. It was a look of being betrayed. Her best friend doing it to her. In a split second, the figure pushed Sophie towards the mirror while simultaneously it reached out from the mirror, grabbing her into it. Sophie was gone. I screamed and screamed until my throat gave out. My mom came rushing in. I couldn't explain to her what I saw. I couldn't look at Sophie's parents in the eyes and tell them what happened. They wouldn't understand anyways. Countless hours of therapy and police investigation later, the general consensus was that it was a kidnapping, and in order to deal with the trauma, my brain had compartmentalized the events of that day into the supernatural. I wish Sophie was kidnapped. That would have been so much better for her than the hell she went to. When I went to school after the summer break, all I could respond to my classmates' inquiry about Sophie was, Bloody Mary took her. Fuck. Sorry for the expletives, but I'm writing this off the cuff with my mind racing a million miles an hour like the last 60 seconds of a timed essay. I don't know when my time's gonna run out, so I just need to tell you guys everything right away. But then again, even if they find out, I told myself that I wouldn't care anymore as long as I get this out there. And yet I'm still looking over my shoulder constantly, and for what? Just goes to show how much they've taken over me and my mind and everything. Everything. Okay. I didn't mean for this to be so suspenseful. So before I go off on another tangent you won't understand yet, let me start from the beginning. It was about 2 weeks ago. Can't remember which day exactly, but that's not important. So on that day during nighttime I was leaving Sobeys in a real hurry. What happened was that while I was buying groceries, I got an alert about servers going down. I work as a DevOps engineer for a software as a service company, and I was on call that week. So I needed to haul ass and get home. I don't have a car, so I just had to walk to the bus stop and hope the ride wasn't slow as fuck like usual. And I was so focused that I almost ran into some random guy in the parking lot. In hindsight, it wasn't my fault, but in the moment I was pissed this guy got in my way, and I was ready to at least give him the stink eye as we turned to face each other. Guy. Oh, sorry. Hey, you need a ride? He straight up asked me that right after taking a glance at the bags in my hand. And of course I was confused since that wasn't something you'd expect from some random stranger, much less one you nearly collided with. After a while I realized I was probably some Uber or Lyft driver waiting around to offer people rides, so I asked him if that was the case. Guy. Nah man, no ride sharing. It's on the house. I just want to help you out. Yes, that sounded shady as hell. And even now I'm still not sure what it was that kept me from just turning around and hightailing it out of there. Maybe it was because I could still feel my phone vibrating. Probably with more degraded server health notifications. So, shadiness be damned. If this guy could get me back to my PC before my ass got fired. I wish I could say that's all it was. That I was rushing and had no other choice. But I think it had just as much to do with how he looked and spoke. I hate to admit it because I like to think I'm not a gullible person, but I don't know. Something about his looks. His dad beard, boringly plain glasses, golf shirt, and the really casual, unassuming way he spoke reminded me of my old soccer coach who always used to drive me and my friends home. Not in a scarily accurate, this guy's an impersonator way, but he just gave off a similar vibe. It's kind of weird to say, but he looked and sounded like someone who just belonged in my life, if that makes sense. So yeah. That's it. That's all it took to get me into the back seat of this stranger's car. I was still a bit on edge, of course, especially when the first thing he did after he started driving was ask for my name. And I know. It would have been so easy to just tell him a fake name, but there was something about him, or maybe the situation we were in, that made me feel like doing that would be wrong. Maybe it was that blind trust that got me into the car to begin with, but I think it was also just a feeling of futility. It's hard to put in words, but hiding my name just felt pointless. I mean, this dude already had me in his car, and everything he was doing so far was to help me, and like, did I really need to pass up the first opportunity I've had in ages to socialize with someone in person during this fucking lockdown? I know it's only been less than a year, but I felt like I'd been lonely for way longer than that. And at some point with the guy was waiting for me to respond. My suspicion turned into thanks. Thanks that he was helping me and wanted to talk to me personally without me having to do anything. I think I even teared up a little. So, eventually, yes, I told him my name. And I can't even begin to tell you how much I fucking hate myself for doing that. But I had no way to know at the time that it was the wrong thing to do. Heck. Even during the rest of the ride, I didn't. We were shooting the shit the whole time through, talking about how this stupid virus turned both our lives upside down. Looking back on it now, he didn't tell me a whole lot about himself. Just that he used to work 9 to 5 at an office and now he had to do that at home. The more I think on it now, the more vanilla his response sounds. What he said applies to like 99% of all office workers. I should have asked him how that was like, if being home with noisy kids affected his work, and maybe I even thought about doing that while I was in the car with him. But I don't know how he does it. But he took the topic like a steering wheel and drove it toward me, missing my friends and family. And well, what can I say? I couldn't help spilling the beans like I was on a psychiatrist's couch. Trust me, I wouldn't normally say a word about this super personal stuff to anyone, but well, I guess my reasoning was that he was basically a taxi driver. Someone who offers you a service and that's it. Someone you're almost never going to cross paths with again. So as horrible as it is now in hindsight, I barely hesitated to tell him about how lonely I was. Being a new grad who flew to the city for a job just in time for lockdown to hit. It felt so relieving to just tell him about how I was forcing myself to be strong, to prove to my parents that I could live on my own, to keep my friends from worrying about me, even though this driver kept just nodding along while kinda slumped back in his chair. But it's not like he was ignoring me, because he'd cut in every once in a while and ask a really meaningful question. It felt like he'd been in this situation with lots of passengers before, which was reassuring to me at the time, but absolutely terrifying to me now. Eventually, though, soon after I finished telling my sad tale, we pulled up to the intersection I'd told him, the one a few blocks from my apartment, even though it felt like I'd been blabbering on for hours in that car. The whole trip took less than 10 minutes, which was a far cry from the 20 or 30 minutes it would have taken me on the bus. And as the frequent vibrations in my pocket kept telling me, every minute counted hugely. So I think that's it. That feeling of relief and having saved my ass that led me to do an even stupider thing before leaving the car. Give the guy my phone number. I know. Like Jesus H. Christ, I wish I could go back in the past and beat myself up for dooming me so obviously like that. But like I keep saying, it was all about the moment, and in that moment the guy's proposal sounded really good. If I ever needed to go out somewhere, text him and he'll drive me there and back if he's not busy. And that's exactly what he did for the next week and a half or so. Usually it'd just be going to Sobeys for more groceries or getting me to appointments like with my dentist. And every single time, we'd have a short chat like the one we had the first time. It all started to feel natural and I started not to hesitate at all before spitting words in the car. Like I was on a road trip with old friends. And I didn't think anything of it until the day we drove out of town to get me a haircut. Yeah, a haircut. Don't you love how innocent it sounds? Started off that way too. With the two of us enjoying a longer than usual chat because of the long trip. It was the middle of the day on a Sunday, and it was smooth sailing all the way up to sitting in the barber's chair. I guess I was a little tense because I didn't know the barber at all. I just went with the closest one I could find open on Google Maps, and she seemed to have a bit of a language barrier. So to keep it simple, I just asked for a trim and then sat back and let my mind worry about work and student loans and a billion other things like I usually did on the barber's chair. So I spaced out like that for who knows how long, but eventually I came back to my senses when I caught an eyeful of something in the mirror. I know I asked for a trim and to keep it short so that I wouldn't have to cut it again, but I swear she was shaving the sides way too short. It didn't look bad, so I didn't complain, but after that, I was on alert. I didn't know why at the time, but I felt even more uneasy looking at my hair. And then that turned into full-on freak-out the moment she combed my long, ridiculous bangs up and started applying gel to hold it all in place. She wasn't doing a trim. She was completely transforming my hair into a full-on Elvis-style pompadour. Me. Excuse me, this isn't what I asked for. Barber. But it is what you want, yes? Okay, what she said there made me really freak out. Some context. For a couple years now, I've been thinking about getting a pompadour ever since I tried on one of those joke wigs at a party and thought it looked surprisingly nice. I just couldn't bring myself to do it because it'd give off a totally different feel from the boring, unassuming mop of hair I have right now. So yeah, the barber was right that I actually wanted it, and was just too chicken to try. But I never told anyone any of that. Not my friends, not my family, and sure as hell not the barber when she asked a few minutes ago. And how the hell did she even know me? I wish I'd said that to her. I wish I'd said anything, but I was so shaken up that all I could do was let her finish the cut, which she went right back to doing without even waiting for my answer. I hate that afterwards when she was done, I liked the result enough to just thank her and pay and walk away like nothing bad had happened. She waved and gave a sweet-sounding goodbye, and it didn't seem creepy or insincere or anything, but it still made my skin crawl as I stepped outside. When I got back in the car, driver guy reacted exactly the way you'd expect him to. Wow, that's pretty bold, but it's a good fit. Looking cool, man. Thanks. Thought about telling him how the barber knew who I was and what hairstyle I subconsciously wanted, and how fucking freaky that was. But then an idea hit me. What if it was him? At that point in time, he was the one who knew me best, and with how well-traveled he seemed to be, it wouldn't be crazy to assume that he and the barber knew each other, right? Me. Hey, you wouldn't happen to know one of the barbers here, would you? Driver. No, I'm the same as you. Never been here before. Me. But then how? Driver. How what? Something wrong? I never wanted to facepalm harder than when I blurted that out. I was going to just give him a non-answer, but he turned in his seat and looked me right in the eye. I wasn't sure you could call it a dominating look because he still looked as outwardly kind as he usually did, but it did make me stop what I was going to do. Driver. Hey man, if there's something wrong, you can tell me. Wouldn't want to drop you off knowing you feel like shit. I really shouldn't have said anything. I mean, looking back on it now, opening up to him about it was basically like putting out a welcome mat for a vampire. I was inviting this guy way too deep into my personal space, but I was still too dumb at the time, too pathetically reliant. So as we started driving back to town, I spilled everything about the barber and her impossible knowledge. Driver. Yeah, that's pretty strange. If this escalates and you feel like you're being watched, you should definitely call the cops. But for now, it's just one person in a place you'll probably never visit again, so don't worry. You can relax. Me. Is it just one person, though? Driver. Huh? What do you mean? Again, I said something out loud that I shouldn't, but I might have done it on purpose just out of frustration. The way he acted so nonchalant about the whole thing was starting to piss me off, so I stopped holding back on my theory. Me. Tell me, did I say anything to you about what haircut I wanted, and have you been talking about me with other people? Driver. Did you tell me? That's hard to say. We talk about so many things in here that I can't really say for sure. Do you remember anything like that? I wanted to say yes so bad, but instead I ended up cursing because he was right. I really hadn't paid much to the stuff we talked about in the car, so when I tried to remember if I'd mentioned hairstyles even briefly, all I got was a vague memory soup of talking and talking while looking at the same car interior over and over. I mean, what really mattered was getting to the place I wanted to go, so why would I care too much about what happened in what was basically a taxi ride? Driver. And, well, I'll be honest. I do talk about you with my friends and family. You and I see each other a couple times a week, so naturally they get curious that there's some new person in my life. So I tell them about you the same way I describe any of my other friends. But that's all, really. In text, that makes him sound fishy as fuck, but again, there's just something about the way he said it that made it sound completely reasonable. Of course, we were basically friends at this point, so why wouldn't he feel comfortable giving people a quick blurb about me? I hate that it still kind of makes sense when I write it out. Me. But did you tell them anything about my hairstyle preferences? Driver. Well, like I said before, it's hard to tell. But even if that did happen, nothing bad came out of it, right? If she didn't know, you wouldn't have a killer haircut right now. So it was better for her to know, don't you think? Even though he wasn't facing me, I could see his eyes relax reassuringly in the rearview mirror. He was basically painting his words as being a look on the bright side sort of response. Like a friend telling you there's tons of others fish in the sea after you get dumped. I wish I could say I called him out on this bullshit, but the face I saw and the voice I heard were so genuine and convincing that I just mumbled out, "Yeah, I guess you're right." or some other equally limp agreement. Driver. And these days, a person's info is a lot like a balloon. Once you let go of it, anyone anywhere can catch it. But it's just a balloon, so nothing to cry over unless you're a kid who loves balloons. Get what I'm saying? He said all that just as nicely as the rest, even laughing a little at the "unless you're a kid" joke. But his eyes. It was brief, and maybe he didn't expect me to be looking in the rearview mirror, but as he was saying that last question, his eyes went wider than I had ever seen them before, and his eyebrows creased down onto them, and he was looking right at me. It goes without saying how terrifying it was to be stuck in a car, on an empty country road with the sun glaring down with the only other person, the driver, staring daggers at you. But it was so quick and unexpected that I just went with my knee-jerk survival reflex and hastily agreed with what he said. Then things went rapidly back to normal after that as we started talking the rest of the way like we usually did. I went with it mostly to calm myself down, to tell myself that what I saw was just a random facial tic, and that agreeing with what he said couldn't have been the same as showing a predator a sign of weakness. But he did take it as a sign of weakness because, after I got home, it wasn't long before they started showing up. Obviously, I had no way of knowing that at the time, other than this horrible feeling in my gut that things were about to get worse somehow. But it didn't take long. And by that I mean, literally the next morning, it was garbage day. So I woke up earlier than usual to grab all my junk. I'll admit, I'm a really messy person when I live alone, so I usually end up filling 2 whole garbage bags with all the crap I have lying around. I'm too lazy and want to do 2 with trips. So I just carry 1 in each hand and kind of stumble my way outside to the back lot where the dumpster is. The reason I do this early is so I don't bump into anyone else on the way. So you can imagine how shook I was when, the moment I stepped outside, someone immediately shouted my name. Not just anyone, but a voice I had literally never heard before. It came from around the corner of the building, so I looked there just as a woman stepped out and started walking toward me. You can probably guess, but I was sure to hell that we had never, ever met before. So of course, I was incredibly creeped out by how she was wearing this huge smile that seemed to want to say otherwise. Her face mask was transparent for whatever reason. I tried to walk on and just ignore her, but she went up in front and blocked me, still smiling the whole time. Woman. Hey, let me help you with that. Me. Sorry, have we met before? Woman. I'm just here to help you. I don't think I ever felt the same mixture of confusion, frustration, and skin-crawling uneasiness with anyone the same way I did with her. I think it was the smile. Even now, I can't remember how she looked because that forced but not forced smile was so distracting. But eventually something clicked in my brain. She was probably someone who lived on one of the lower floors and saw me struggling with the 2 garbage bags on the way outside. So I figured, hey, why not try to be a friendly neighbor and calm down a bit? Me. Which floor are you from? Woman. Huh? Oh no, I don't live here. Well, I can't even remember what I said in response, but it was probably unintelligible anyway, as my brain folded in on itself from what she just said. Woman. I just came by to help you take out your trash. Here, let me show you. She yanked one of the bags out of my hand and made a beeline for the dumpster. I just stood there with my mouth hanging open because, well, can you really blame me? How did she know me? How did she know where I lived? How did she know the exact time I usually take out trash? And who the fuck even was she? I had no choice but to walk up to where she was standing in front of the dumpster, wiping her hands after having thrown in the bag she took. But before I could say anything, she yanked the other bag out of my hand, tossed it in, then turned to look at me with, you guessed it, that incredibly cursed smile. Woman. See? Pretty helpful, right? Me. Why? I barely started talking before she walked up closer to me. It wasn't super close to the point of being uncomfortable, but it was enough to make her smile look like it filled my entire view, and I don't know. Even in broad daylight out in public, I got the shiver of a feeling that I could die then and there. Woman, see you next week. Then she walked right past me and started making for the other side of the building, which is probably where she had her car parked. It took me a while to come down from the high of freak out, but I eventually screamed out, "Wait," which made her start sprinting away. I wanted to run after her, so I could at least see her car and have some chance of identifying who the fuck she was. But all of a sudden my phone started vibrating like crazy. Work alarm. Daily stand-up was about to start. So I gave up trying to catch her and rushed back inside instead. Reading my phone had already distracted me long enough for her to get away. I think I heard a car's engine rev up and quickly fade off into the distance. And at the time I figured it wasn't worth risking my job over. What would I even tell my team if they asked why I was late? This woman came out of nowhere and knew exactly when I was going to take out my trash, even though we never met before, just so she could help me? Saying that to myself made the creepiness of what just happened really dawn on me, making me even more anxious as I slipped back into my apartment and tried, and failed to, focus on the next 8 hours. I ended up breaking one of our deployment pipelines. Twice. I fixed it both times and everything worked out in the end, but it wasted enough time for everybody that I was sure they were silently watching and judging me through their screens. So the moment it hit 5, I shut everything down and decided to go for a walk for once. Maybe what happened earlier was all just a daydream. Maybe I was just losing it. I just had to wake myself up, take my mind off things and focus on reality. And then I'd stop feeling like I was stuck and had to do something but had no power to do it. Like I was being suffocated. But I didn't even make it to the lobby's front door. Some guy in a dress shirt and tie, again, someone I have never fucking met before in my life, came through the door before I could get to it. He called out, "Tom," my name, in a friendly way as he walked toward me, as if he and I planned on meeting at this exact time. The moment I saw he was wearing the same sort of transparent face mask as the woman earlier, I froze in fear. Man. Can't wrap your head around VPC configuration, eh? Well, you're looking at the perfect tutor for getting you up to speed. No fucking way. Not my work, too. Not the specific thing that always gave me trouble. I wanted to scream into this guy's stupid smiling face, but the receptionist was there along with some people coming and going through the doors. So after another near panic attack, I figured the best way out was to just shut this case before things got any worse. Me. Sorry, I think you're mistaking me for someone else. Man. Come on, this isn't time for jokes. I know it's you. What's the point of hiding from someone who wants to help you? The last part hit a nerve because it reminded me of what that woman said earlier. I'm just here to help. And sure enough, when I looked at his face, all I could see was a huge smile. One that was way too genuine if that were even possible. At that point, I couldn't take it anymore. Me. Come with me. I led him over to a smaller hallway off to the side where it didn't seem like anyone was passing through. Me. Look, I don't care what it is you're trying to help me with, but can you please just stop? Man. Stop what? Offering free help and guidance? That's... me. No, I mean, stop fucking spying on me. Man, what do you mean? I'm not spying on you at all. Me. Bullshit. Then how do you know something as personal as my job weakness is? And how do you even know me and where I live? I glared at him with a sigh of confidence. There was no way for him to weasel his way out of those questions. Or so I thought, because he just laughed. Somehow, he did it without changing the shape of his mouth. Did that mean he was silently laughing to himself the whole time? And the same with the woman earlier. Both in the moment and while writing this. Felt my skin crawl. Man, it's openly available information for anyone looking to help out. That's all I'm doing. I just want to help you succeed in your career, Tom. I was about to mouth off on him. The fuck you mean openly available? But before I could, he went up beside me and put his arm around my shoulder as if we were old buddies. Man, life is scary, especially at work, and especially your first full-time position. So I know that deep down, beneath your anger and confidence, you're feeling lost. You won't admit it, but you need help from someone like me. That's why I came here for you. So what do you say? This should have been where I shoved him away and told the receptionist he was a shady character that needed to be kicked off the premises, but... Dear God, do I hate to admit this. What he said actually made me drop my guard. I was getting the same feeling of relief and acceptance as I did when Driver Guy offered his help to me all those nights ago. And, come to think of it, the whole time he never did anything bad. He was literally just a friendly valet. So if this mentor guy was saying the same sort of thing and offering the same sort of help, why wouldn't I accept? But something was wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. Something he said. You won't admit it, but you need help from someone like me. I couldn't tell why at the time, but it gave me a serious case of that suffocating feeling from earlier. Maybe it was paranoia, but it was less about the feeling of being watched and more about feeling like something was being taken away from me. Something that I would never get back. Something that I pictured him devouring whole between the huge, always shining teeth of the smile that was now right next to me. That did it. I shoved him away, ran to my apartment even as he shouted my name over and over and slammed down the lock on my front door. I slumped back against the door after that, hoping that the receptionist saw us and kicked that freak out of the building. When I looked down, I saw my phone on the floor. Must have fallen out of my pocket in all the mayhem. Looking at it, all I could think about was the person I'd called and texted the most over the past week. The driver. It had to be him. I was sure of it. Who else had gotten to know me recently and could leak out my personal info? So I picked up my phone and dialed his number, ready to suss him out for taking advantage of me like this. But he didn't pick up. I must have dialed a dozen times and got nothing. It's possible he was busy, but the timing of everything, plus my mounting suspicion, made me seriously doubt that. So I wrote an angry text and said, but the moment I hit send, I had this horrible anxiety suddenly grip my chest like an icy hand. I fucked up. I seriously fucked up. Now he knows I know. So what is he going to do to me now? I tried to figure out a worst case scenario, but then it hit me that there was no way for me to know. I had no way of knowing exactly how much he knew about me. If he was the one who leaked something that private to the mentor guy, who knew how far the rabbit hole went? And I had no way of proving any of this either. I probably sound like a crazy person trying to oust a well-meaning person with no proof. Eventually, I felt the hardness of the door at my back, and convinced myself that I would be safe as long as I stayed in here and kept it locked. It worked. Until it didn't. I can't remember what exactly I was thinking, but I remember scrambling through my entire apartment, opening and unpacking everything while fearing that I'd find a camera or something worse. Even while checking my work laptop and PC for spyware, I was in a frenzy, mind racing, finding it hard to breathe as the suffocating feeling started to feel real. Kept at that for God knows how long until I just suddenly blacked out, probably from exhaustion and panic. Must have been a deep sleep because when I woke up, I was so groggy and couldn't remember what led me to wipe out on the floor. What woke me was my phone vibrating on my stomach. It had some notifications from Discord, which made me laugh because it was probably my friends sending dumb memes like always. It wasn't. They were DMs. All from a user I didn't know. User. Hey, I heard you were feeling down about your parents refusing to talk to you after moving out. So I thought I'd tell you what to do to improve your situation. Then they went on in a much longer post to give some detailed life advice. To be honest, it all sounded really good, but that couldn't distract me from the two enormous elephants in the room. How could they have known something I was sure I'd never said out loud to anyone? And how in the ever-loving fuck did they know my Discord handle? It all came back to me then and there. Everything that happened yesterday. Maybe it was because this person was just pixels on a screen instead of a terrifying in-person smile, but instead of feeling scared, I was pissed beyond belief. Me. Why the fuck are you doing this? Who gives you the right to know something that personal? That's an invasion of privacy if you didn't know. User. Sorry if I came off too strong here. I'm just trying to help you out with problems that you're too afraid to tell anyone. It's natural to keep it all to yourself, but that's not healthy, right? You're strong, Tom, but you don't always know the best way to reach out to people. That's why I'm here to help you. Again, I felt like I had hit the same brick wall as when the mentor guy had said something similar. I stared at the text for a long time, but eventually, out of nowhere, my fingers moved on their own. Me. Why do you get to decide that? That was it. After sending and reading that over, everything finally made sense. The unease at all these people, even though they were helping me, and the suffocating feeling that went with it. Now I knew what was causing all that. They were choosing what parts of me to share. They were keeping me from deciding that for myself. I didn't want people to know that I was struggling at work, or that my parents had practically disowned me. But what did that matter if some other people decided to put everything out there outside of my control? Throughout this text conversation, I had been standing straight up, but now I sunk to my knees feeling completely powerless. It was like I was losing the grip on myself that kept me together, because they had seized all the parts of me instead. My phone buzzed with the user's response, but I didn't even read as I desperately sent back, "Stop. I never asked for this. Just fucking stop." User. I'm sorry to say this, but the info didn't just come from nowhere. So you must have had some involvement. I wanted to throw my phone at the wall because I knew exactly what they meant. But was it really my fault that I decided to tell that fucking driver about myself? Was it my fault for trusting someone who really did make my life easier? And did I really tell him enough to figure out everything? Thought back to his balloon analogy and hated how it sounded like something true and inevitable in my mind. My phone buzzed again, but I never got to read what came next. Because at that moment, I heard a metallic rattling coming from my front door. The rattling of a key. I think I momentarily whited out in sheer terror. I can't even remember what my reaction was. All I know is that the next thing I saw was my open door and someone standing there with a key in hand. That's when I screamed. Man, please calm down. Sorry for startling you. It took me a while, but I realized that the man in front of me wasn't the driver, which probably would have given me a heart attack. Instead, it was an older man wearing a sweater vest and glasses, and although he had one of those transparent face masks too, I could see that he was giving a concerned frown, rather than a smile like I'd been expecting. That last part was probably why I just stood there and let him continue talking. Man, let me introduce myself. Here. He handed me a business card which stated that this guy was, of all things, a psychiatrist. Psychiatrist. You've been suffering mental issues for quite some time, and let me tell you, they're not something anyone can deal with on their own. So I'm here to offer my assistance. By being around you, I can help you with your mental states at any time, and monitor how you're progressing. What he actually said was probably longer. I'm paraphrasing because in the moment I was freaking out the more he explained. Mental issues? Since when? When I asked him, I immediately regretted it. He knew everything. Everything. He knew how I'd spent most of my nights after work, even before quarantine, just laying in bed, barely moving and waiting hours for my brain to turn off. That the reason I stopped hanging out with friends after uni was because I was so anxious and tired and detached around them. That I regularly contemplated giving up on school, and now work, just to make everything in my life stop moving. Make it all stop pulling me apart in every direction. It was all super detailed and on the mark, as if we'd already been having therapy sessions for months now, which, looking back on it, Made this even more nonsensical because I've shown that side of myself and shared those feelings with absolutely 0 people. But it was like he read my mind because before I could come to that conclusion, he started talking again. Psychiatrist. By knowing this about you, I can help you rehabilitate and eventually overcome these issues. You don't have to carry them all on your own anymore. We'll work them out together. I sound like a broken record, but he had a point. With this professional psychiatrist already knowing the details of my problems, he'd be able to help me out way more than what I could have done for myself. It was very relieving, actually. It made me realize that all this time, I wanted someone to know about me and the shit I was going through, without me having to make the time and vulnerability to put myself out there. This guy already knew, and he didn't judge me for it, and he wanted to help me with it. When I looked back at his concerned face and grasped his business card in my hand, I felt like I had found the way out I'd been searching for God knows how long. Again, his timing was perfect, because right as I finished that thought, he handed me a sign-up form. I reached out and took it, and I think I teared up while doing that because I was just so overwhelmed. He made the kind of warm, polite eye contact you'd expect from a therapist and then smiled at me. He smiled, and that's when I saw it. The front door, it was wide open because he unlocked it. Because my lock, my permission didn't matter anymore. Because he gets to decide. Because they get to decide how unguarded, how easy to open my front door is. Not me. I have no say, no control. And at that moment, I did lose control of my body as I shut the door and then socked the guy in the face so hard that he immediately crumpled to the floor. He didn't say anything. He couldn't say anything because I didn't give him any time to spout more bullshit. Between me pummeling his head nonstop and me finally saying things I should have said way earlier. I don't give a flying fuck what you want to do with all that shit you found out about me. I get to decide when to share it, who to share it with, if I should even share it at all. Me. Get it? I get to decide. Me. Only me. Did your friend hear that too? In hindsight, it was kind of ridiculous of me to think that there was a transceiver or camera transmitting back to the driver. But I was still convinced he was watching over me somehow, so I just kept punching harder to make my point. I don't know how long that went on for, but eventually 2 things got my attention. The psychiatrist's lack of movement and the gross, oily feeling of blood covering my hands. When I finally looked down at his head properly, I nearly puked my guts out. And then I think I whited out for a bit. I just killed a man in cold blood inside my own home, and my brain was crashing from trying to process that. When I could feel myself breathing again, still hunched over this psychiatrist's now dead body, I felt a weird kind of inner bliss. It wasn't pretty, but I finally won myself some peace and quiet from at least one of the people who were taking me away from myself. But that's the thing. That was just one guy. Who's to say there weren't more? I looked over my shoulder at the front door and scrambled to lock it, but I couldn't even feel relief from that, because looking down at the proof of my crime reminded me about the key. Was it really just that one key? What if there were more helpers arriving and ready to unlock my door right now? I looked at that sole entrance into my apartment and felt dread knotting my stomach. The front door, any shut door, was useless. They knew. They already knew. I didn't know how, but that driver and his twisted network definitely knew that I'd murdered one of their own. I dropped to my knees and started shivering all over, feeling like I was already being watched and punished with no way out. But that's it. That's what they wanted me to feel. If I let myself think I don't have control anymore, control over what people can and can't know about me, then they win. These fuckers that drove me to literal bloody murder would have the last laugh. And I'm not gonna let them. I already did that by writing this whole thing up and describing all of their techniques. All of their ways of preying on people like me to change the way they think so that stuff like this sounds acceptable. In the end, I didn't cave. I broke free, but it cost me losing enough sanity to beat a person to death. That, and knowing that I'll be behind bars while the people who got me to this point will get away and repeat this on who knows how many other people. But at least I'll get this information out there and warn hopefully a few other would-be victims. I'm running out of time. I actually don't know when the cops will arrive, but somehow, some way, those other helpers will do something and I'll be fucked. So to make sure I get this all posted before I lose internet access, probably forever, let me just end it with the simple, obvious thing I should have already known from the beginning. Don't let them in. Don't give your privacy away. Sharing is up to you, not them. Don't give it to them. Don't. Okay, what the heck is that shrieking sound? My girlfriend was only mildly frustrated from the background noise. I looked at her with a concerned look, as there was not much that I could do to stop the frightful wailing coming from the backyard. Sorry, my love, I told her through the phone, glancing up to my bedroom window across the room. It's the neighbor's dog. There must be a rabbit or something in the yard. I'm sure it's nothing. Well, it's kind of annoying to me. All I can hear is that static shrieking through the phone. It's driving me crazy. Now, forgive me if I make it sound like my girlfriend in any way dislikes dogs. That's not the case. She absolutely adores all animals, especially dogs. My neighbor's pet was simply growling in such a feral way that it could hardly be called a dog's barking. It sounded more akin to a wild animal fighting tooth and nail to save its life. The first night that I heard the howling outside my bedroom window, I had originally assumed that a wild coyote had gotten a hold of the neighbor's pet, however the sounds did not cease like they should have. Hours had passed further into the night and the dog continued to wail. This continued every night for nearly a week. The timing in which the animal would begin its horrendous screaming was not consistent, nor was the duration in which said screaming had lasted. I had contemplated speaking to the neighbor's son about the pet dog, but due to my poor social skills, I had decided against it. Maybe I'll talk to my dad or one of the neighbors about it tomorrow morning and try to get some answers. I thought out loud. You should, 'cause I don't want to hear it every night we call. She stated with the tone in her voice that I got the impression the whole situation was my fault. Whether or not she intended to make me feel that way, she would never tell me. However, it was likely that she was not impressed with me ignoring the barking as a whole rather than simply speaking to the neighbor about the animal's noise. The next morning, over an unhealthy breakfast of pancakes drowned in maple syrup, I had asked my father if he had heard the barking through the recent evenings. He confirmed that he had indeed heard the noise and that he had planned on asking the neighbors to keep their pets inside through the nights. It was clear to me that he had not slept as well as he had in the nights before. My father's eyes were sunken slightly, and barely visible dark circles had formed around them. His face seemed longer and more susceptible to frowning than his normal, cheery visage, though it was likely due to the fact that his eyes were so tired-looking. That damn dog, he muttered before finishing his coffee and placing his mug into the sink. My father worked long days as a factory manager. He often had spent his spare time in the building itself to ensure the success of his employees and, more importantly, the future of his job. He had left that morning around 8 and likely wouldn't be home until 8 or shortly after the night. His sleep schedule through the nights, where the dog screeching was more apparent, was nearly non-existent. He had tasked me with house chores through the days whilst he was away. One such chore was to visit the neighbor and, yes, you guessed it, politely asked them to keep their pets inside, or at the very least quiet through the nights, as he was unsure when he would be able to ask in person. I bid him farewell on this day and finished all other household chores I had been tasked with for the day before noon hour. After baking some homemade sweets and preparing dinner, I had thrown together a dessert package for the neighbors, hoping that this would lessen the blow of my complaint. I rehearsed that I had prepared to say while I walked down the driveway, and the 5-minute dirt road to my neighbor's residence. The Whitmers were always kind people, from when I had remembered them. Mrs. Whitmer had passed away, too young as my father would say, much like my mother. Mrs. Whitmer had left to go for a morning jog and had disappeared not 5 minutes from her own home. The difference between the two was that her body was found near the edge of a dense forest by authorities nearly 4 days later, and less than a half-mile from her own front door. The official cause of death was a bear attack, as the body was so horribly mangled and torn apart. Those 5.5 long years without his wife had mentally destroyed Mr. Whitmer. He had become a hollow, cranky, old shell of the former man he was. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmer had always loved to be outside with their vast array of pets, but in the years following Mrs. Whitmer's death, Mr. Whitmer was very rarely seen outside. The one memory that stuck with me about Mrs. Whitmer was one of her telling me various tales of her husband's sweet tooth as she baked me cookies in the evening that my father had led the search party for my mother on the day she went missing. She had passed a year after my mother nearly to the day. I knocked on Mr. Whitmer's door, silently praying that the tray of sweets at the very least would be enough to brighten his mood. After nearly 2 minutes, I reached my hand out to knock again, but jumped back when I heard the lock violently turn, and the door was pulled open. What's this?" he asked with a clear expression of confusion on his face. The old man was considerably more frail than the last time I had seen him, his face riddled with wrinkles, his hair thin and gray. He was slouching toward the open door with his arm holding the door open in such a manner that it appeared that he was using the door to hold himself up. I was afraid he would fall over at any moment. Hi, hello, Mr. Whitmer." I started out while trying desperately to remember the speech I had planned out. "I was doing some baking for my dad, and, thought you might want a tray of some homemade sweets and stuff." I awkwardly smiled while holding the tray out for him to take. A warm smile slowly crossed his face as he held up one hand to decline my offer. No, it's quite thoughtful, son, but I haven't been able to eat anything like that in years. My sugar's too high, see?" he explained. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Whitmer. I didn't realize," I stammered, feeling my own embarrassment becoming clear on my face. Before I could say anything else, Mr. Whitmer gazed out his front door and towards my house. "Your new pup must be driving your father bonkers. He's awful loud, ain't he?" "Huh? Oh, we don't have a new pup, Mr. Whitmer." Felt chills run down my spine. The gravity of the situation hadn't fully sunk in yet, but it was startling nonetheless. "That's why I came. I thought that maybe it was your dog." I trailed off. He slowly adjusted his gaze to me. I think in that moment, both the old man and I had realized the same thing. I apologized to my neighbor for interrupting his day, to which he dismissed and welcomed me over any time. "Before you go," he started as I had half turned away from his front door, "you'd best stay inside after dark. Don't let your paw out if you can help it, son." His face was pale, filled with fear, though he had obviously been trying to hide it. Clearly this man had known more than he was willing to let on. I nodded and began towards my house. That evening was not unlike most evenings for me. I made and ate dinner alone, prepared a plate for my father's late return, and hand-washed the dishes that I had dirtied. I then made myself comfortable on the living room couch after popping in an old shark movie from the 70s into the DVD player. I wanted to be close to the front door to greet my father upon his return, hence why I chose to reside temporarily within the closest room to the front entrance, the living room. After a particular scene where the antagonist shark of the film jump-scared an old fishing boat, my father had unlocked the front door loudly. The creaky metal lock snapped open, lined up nearly perfectly with the jump scare, and I nearly fell off the couch due to the startling sound my father made. My father entered the house, closing the door behind him as I regained my composure. I must have done a poor job of hiding my temporary fright as he asked if I was alright as soon as he saw me. I then explained the scare he gave me, to which he had a laugh together. He then took off his shoes, warmed his dinner, and joined me for the film's finale. Having seen the movie so often, my father had quoted nearly every memorable line left in the film, and we remarked on the film's greatness as the credits began to roll. My father had begun to feast while I searched through our films for another classic to play. I looked back to my father as soon as I heard the faint, squealing sounds coming from outside. He sat a few feet behind me in his lazy boy armchair, chewing slow and quietly as he listened. "Mr. Whitmer," I started, but my father only nodded as he finished chewing, and finished my sentence for me. "He doesn't have a dog. I dropped by his place on my way home." I waited. I waited for my father to continue. I waited for my father to express how proud he was of me for making our neighbor's sweets. I wanted for my father to change the topic. I waited for my father to express his theories as to what he believed the barking to be. Finally he spoke. "I don't want you going outside for a while. Not if you can help it. I'm going to take time off and we are going to take a vacation soon." I looked to him with concern. He was raising more questions than he was answering, and I knew that if I was to pry, then he would only become stressed. My father rarely stresses, but when he does, he typically would not calm down for a few hours. I would not want him to lose any extra sleep over stress, as he was likely only getting the bare minimum amount of sleep anyway. My father and I indulged in my homemade sweets while trying to ignore the screaming animal outside. I had prayed that the sounds would eventually fade into background noise, but I could never get used to the wailing no matter how hard I tried. My father had ended up going to bed shortly after 10 o'clock that evening. I decided to text my girlfriend while I finished watching an 80s science fiction robot movie to try and distract myself from the blood-curdling howling coming from my backyard. I did not want to tell my girlfriend about how the screeching had not stopped since our last phone call, due to the lack of answers I possessed as to what was creating the screeching. I was concerned that she would grow to worry for me. Ever figure out why your neighbor's dog keeps barking every night? Beside her text was the little yellow ponder emoji. You know, the one with the little index finger and thumb stroking the chin of the circular head. That's the one. No, not yet. It's probably just some wild animal scaring it. Or maybe it's the mating call of a fox or a coyote. I messaged her back and used the same thinking emoji she had sent me. Now feeling stressed about the mysterious and ever so constant animal howling outside, I decided that I would partake in eating potato chips to cure my anxious thoughts. I may have developed a bad habit of stress eating junk food the night my mother went missing. Now I am by no means obese. I am quite thin, as I rarely eat such foods to begin with. However, when I do, I eat a lot at once. I stood up off the couch and paused the film with the television remote. With the soundtrack of the movie now on pause, it was at this point that I had suddenly realized the terror sounds from outside were no longer present. In fact, nearly every sound was gone. It was so quiet that I was positive I could hear the blood rushing from my ears. I heard my heart racing, throbbing in my chest. My slow and shallow breaths came out like blaring bomb sirens when compared to the stillness in that moment. I think it stopped. I texted my girlfriend after a long moment of standing still. I took one step towards the kitchen and froze when I heard a loud crashing sound coming from the basement. I jumped as I heard what sounded like several glass panes smashing to millions of pieces on the downstairs floor. My father had likely heard the crash too, as he was out of his room and down the stairway leading to the second floor in a matter of seconds, his double-barrel shotgun held firmly in hand, his knuckles white as he clutched the gun and, with a satisfying click, he opened the door and popped 2 ammunition shells into the barrel and popped the shotgun closed. I stood motionless, frozen, staring deep into my father's eyes. I was searching for comfort, for anything that would calm me down, anything to tell me that we would be okay and safe. I never found what I was looking for. The hell was that? My father whispered under his breath as he stared behind me and towards the basement door. He kept his eyes trained on that door and never once took his eyes off it. He kept his ears alert and listened for any further sounds, and he kept the shotgun loaded and firmly in his grasp. I didn't reply to him. I simply stood still. After another minute or two of us locked in this situation, tied like puppets by the strings of fear, my father slowly loosened his grip on the gun and brought it down to his side in one hand. Must just be a squirrel, or... Just as quickly as my father had started speaking, he was cut off by the horrible wailing again. The wailing was much louder now. The sound was not coming from outside. This time the sound was coming from the basement, right below us. The window panes on the front door began to rattle, and pictures were violently shaken off the walls. I dropped my phone and brought up my hands to cover my ears. I clenched my teeth and shut my eyes, but no matter how hard I tried, I was unable to prevent the sounds from reaching my ears. My palms grew sweaty and wet. No, not sweat. It was blood. My ears bled and rang. My head pounded. My vision blurred. The whole world began to rapidly spin around me. At some point, my father had grabbed my arm and led me outside in a panic. He led me directly to the deep blue pickup truck that he drove, and I climbed into the passenger seats while he went around to the driver's side and pulled himself inside. He gently tossed the shotgun to the back seat and gripped the steering wheel. After a moment of us both catching our breaths, he looked to me and analyzed my wounds. He too had a small trickle of blood originating from his ears. "Are you hurt?" he asked me breathlessly. "No, I'm fine," I stammered out. What was that thing?" I asked. "Well, I sure can tell you it ain't no bear." He started while he looked around for his keys. After a long moment and his single deep inhale followed by him blowing out all the air in his lungs aggressively through his mouth, he stated, "They're inside." As calmly as he could. I knew what that meant. We were trapped until one of us had decided to leave the temporary safety of the vehicle and head into the monster's new lair to retrieve our salvation. "I'm faster than you are," I began. "No," he said calmly yet firmly. "I can fire the gun. You've shown me before." I said no. My father yelled. His emotions taking control over him. "I've lost your mother to that thing and I ain't losing you to it." It was apparent that he had instantly regretted saying what he had said, as he was likely trying to hide this from me for some time. I wondered if Mr. Whitmer had known about this creature as well. I waited a long while before I asked what had been on my mind. "Lost Mom to what, Dad?" He was silently sobbing for what felt like an eternity before he wiped his eyes and looked over to me. "The night that we lost her?" He began slowly, seemingly second-guessing on whether or not he should tell me. I led that search party through the woods, and eventually the sun began to set. We were going to pack it in for the night and look again come morning. However, there was a shriek, a small whimper, a cry of some sort, off in the distance, so a few of us go, flashlights drawn, and we take a look. Well, we turn a few trees and get to where it came from, but there ain't nothing there. We look round and round, but still nothing. Then one of the guys gets the bright idea to look up. I tell you, son, I prayed more in those 5 minutes than I have in my whole life. He paused for about a minute, his gaze fixed to the front door of the house, still wide open with the living room's orange light spilling just outside the front door. The wailing had stopped again, which to me was not any more relief than it had kept going. He stroked his scruffy chin before continuing. Up in that tree there was something big. Looked to be like a really muscular badger, or maybe a wolverine or some sort of small dog. But the thing that glowed from the flashlight's beam was your mother's favorite necklace. It was just there, dangling out of its mouth. That thing was staring at us with its lifeless eyes. Just pure black eyes. It let out its cry. The same one we've been hearing. Just a single yelp and hopped off through the trees. That one was the baby, 'cause something real big, much bigger than it, was following it. He ran like hell out of there. We never found the thing again. Went looking the next day. Didn't find the necklace. If my father had told me this tale any other night, I would have thought he was drunk the night he went searching for my mother all those years ago. However, given the current situation, I believed him. Of course, the police didn't believe us. They thought we had encountered a raccoon in the trees or something else small, I suppose. I gawked at my father. Something caught my eye. Right outside his driver's side window were two small yellow circles simply hovering. I shifted my gaze and peered out his window as he kept talking. I didn't pick up on what he was saying. I only focused on the figure outside his window. I realized too late that the yellow orbs were actually the moon's reflection on the shiny black eyes of the creature. The being smashed its head through the window with ease, its massive hulking canine-like head over my father's lap and in front of his face. Both my father and I had jumped from the terror. The creature began violently shaking its massive head back and forth, opening and closing its maw. Its teeth were a deep yellow and looked more like shark's teeth. They were thick, triangular, and serrated, and the beast had countless rows of these teeth in its snout. Its fur was thick, jet black with matted patches of red. Blood formed around the top and bottom of the creature's head from where it had cut itself on the broken glass. Yet it seemed to be in no pain as it continued to shake its fierce head, snarling and biting the air. Its eyes looked fake. They were bulging orbs of shiny blackness, almost that of a stuffed teddy bear's. Between my screaming and my father's kicking and pounding on the beast's head, he yelled for me to fire the shotgun into the creature's face. I spun around and tried to reach the gun in the back seat. My fingertips managed to graze the gun's handle as a wet, warm splash of liquid drenched my face, accompanied by a sickeningly wet, squishing sound. My father screamed and I wiped my eyes and spat out the copper-tasting fluid. With an extremely deep crunching, more of my father's pained hollering and blood flying everywhere, the beast had pulled my father out the truck door window by his left arm and off into the night. Within seconds I was alone, shaking in shock and in silence. I sobbed before slowly turning around and again reaching for the shotgun. I had not entirely processed what had happened in those short few moments as, when I had retrieved the firearm, I aimed it out the window that the monster had dragged my father out of and whimpered about how I didn't want to shoot my dad and how the beast was moving too much to get a shot. A series of quiet and fast knocking on my window jolted me back into reality as I spun around, not sure what to expect. Mr. Whitmer stood outside my door, face full of confusion. "Sonny, are you all right? Where's your paw?" he asked. I only screamed something about a dire wolf going rogue, which, of course, had confused him even more so. Through my panicked attempts to warn the old man, he had eventually understood the important parts of my message and turned to go back towards his house. The poor old man hadn't made it 3 feet from my window before the canine creature had appeared seemingly out of nowhere and proceeded to maul the man. He didn't even scream while the attack happened, either because the attack startled him so badly that his heart gave out, or because the animal had attacked his head and neck area to begin with and had killed him instantly. It viciously tore at the man and shook him around as though his corpse was a new chew toy for an overexcited dog. An arm had flown off and cracked my window before leaving a thick streak of blood from the large crack towards the ground. I nearly threw up when I saw the cryptid hold the body in its mouth, stand on its hind legs, place its front paws on the torso of the old man's body, and separate the body in half from the waist. I closed my eyes and listened to the horrible sound of the man being reduced to ribbons only feet away from me. The sound of police sirens and the multicolored flashing lights had been enough to persuade the creature into hiding. I watched as it growled its deep growl and turned a full 180 degrees and sprinted into the dense forest behind my house. I sat there and sobbed, waiting for the officers to collect me. By the time a kind ambulance driver and young police officer had arrived at the truck door, I was dry heaving and on the verge of hyperventilating. There was no physical trauma done to me, so I sat in the back of the ambulance with one of the young police officers and a blanket around me. She explained to me how there was a call from the neighbor's house as the man who placed the call was worried from all the commotion outside. God bless you, Mr. Whitmer, I thought to myself. I then explained to the young woman how the dog-like creature had used its screaming to try and deafen my father and I, about how the animal had broken into the house and about how it dragged my father away, and lastly about the death of Mr. Whitmer. The remains of Mr. Whitmer had only been several long strips of flesh and clothes and a small puddle of blood with the odd bone fragment. His whole right arm was later recovered just under my father's pickup truck on the passenger side. While other officers drew their weapons and examined the surrounding area, I kept insisting to the woman that it was a dog that lived in the trees with rows and rows of teeth, with a horrible screaming and with lifeless coal black eyes. They recorded the entire incident as a bear attack, of course, and dismissed my story as shock-induced trauma. They found my father, still breathing, however, unconscious, in the backyard, near the tree line. His whole left arm from about the shoulder down was severely shredded. He and I were rushed to the hospital in the ambulance, and he went under immediate surgery on his arm. They could only do so much in terms of nerve repair. However, he was able to keep his arm. He would go through several long months of therapy to regain nearly complete control over his arm and his fingers. He cannot extend any finger in full length, nor can he touch the palm of his hand with his fingertips. However, he has gotten used to using his hand quite well. He is still considerably weaker with that arm than the other, though he was always more dominant in his right arm anyway. As for me, I have received extensive therapy for my daily nightmares. I've had the odd case of that creature returning to me in a state of sleep paralysis, which is a horror story on its own. The truly haunting part is that I haven't heard any sound since the attack about a year ago. The haunting part is knowing that the creature is out there and still alive. The haunting part is finding out that this creature goes into hiding for 50 weeks out of the year and they come out for 2. The haunting part is hearing the screaming coming from the forest last night, accompanied by another, much louder screaming, much closer screaming.